Alright, let's talk about a place called Burkina Faso. It's a landlocked country in West Africa, brimming with vibrant cultures, incredible music, and a history that's, well, complicated. Picture this. You're living your life part of ancient kingdoms like the Mossi, Gurma, or Dagamba, and then suddenly, a bunch of Europeans show up. This wasn't a friendly house call, it was the beginning of the colonial era, a period that would reshape the region in ways no one quite asked for. It's like that uninvited guest who not only crashes your party but rewrites the guest list and changes the music. France, in particular, was feeling pretty ambitious. They looked at the vast Sahel region, which includes modern-day Burkina Faso, and thought, that'll do nicely. The Mossi kingdoms, for instance, had existed for centuries with complex social structures, political systems, and rich traditions. Buckle up, folks. This historical deep dive is about to get real. So, why Burkina Faso? Or, as it was known for much of this period, Upper Volta. For the French, it wasn't initially about finding El Dorado. The initial interest was heavily strategic. The land that would become Burkina Faso was a convenient piece of real estate that could help connect their coastal holdings with their possessions further inland. The first Europeans to really poke around weren't usually soldiers. They were often explorers, missionaries, or traders. Missionaries would set up schools and clinics, which sounds lovely, but also often came with a healthy dose of your traditional beliefs are quaint but wrong. Then came the treaties. French envoys would approach local chiefs and rulers, offering protection or friendship in exchange for, well, that's where things got murky. This early phase was characterized by a gradual encroachment, a sort of we're just looking around, don't mind us vibe that slowly but surely tightened the colonial grip. Alright, so the polite may we come in phase eventually gave way to the we're coming in anyway and we've brought friends with cannons phase. The infamous Berlin Conference of 1884 to 85 really kicked things into high gear. European leaders gathered in Germany without a single African representative to carve up the continent. The territories that would form Burkina Faso fell decisively into the French sphere of influence. This enforcement often came in the form of military expeditions. These weren't gentle diplomatic missions, these were columns of soldiers, often including African recruits from other colonized areas, marching through the land to pacify it. One particularly notorious example was the Voulay-Chanoine mission in 1898-99. The powerful Mossi Empire of Ouagadougou, led by the Mogo Naba Wobgo, initially tried to resist French encroachment. Unfortunately, good intentions and traditional warriors, however brave, were often no match for machine guns and organized military force. By the late 1890s and early 1900s, most of the key territories were subdued. Once the French had planted their flags and pacified the resistance, they got down to the business of actually running the place. The territory that is now Burkina Faso had a bit of an identity crisis on French maps. It was initially just part of a larger entity called Upper Senegal and Niger. Then, in 1919, they decided to carve it out as a separate colony called Haute Volta, Upper Volta. But then, in 1932, they changed their minds again. Upper Volta was dissolved, its territory parceled out to Ivory Coast, French Sudan, and Niger. The economic side of this new management was not geared towards local prosperity. The French colonial project was all about making the colonies profitable for France. This meant a heavy emphasis on cash crops like cotton and groundnuts, often at the expense of local food security. The so-called Civilizing mission also had a profound impact on traditional social structures and culture. Local chiefs, who once held significant authority, found themselves either co-opted into the French administrative system as intermediaries, or stripped of their power. French became the language of administration, law, and advancement, marginalizing local languages. The disruption to traditional ways of life, the economic hardship, the loss of autonomy, and the psychological impact of being treated as second-class citizens in your own land created a massive collective headache for the local population. The early 20th century saw two massive global conflicts, World War I and World War II, and guess who got dragged into Europe's messes? That's right, colonial subjects from across Africa, including many thousands from Upper Volta. These soldiers, the tirailleurs, fought and died for France on distant battlefields. They were promised better treatment, greater rights, maybe even a path to more self-rule as a thank you. When they returned, however, they found that not much had changed on the home front. This disillusionment coupled with exposure to new ideas and the sight of their colonial masters being challenged, began to fuel the flames of nationalism. Educated Africans, some of whom had studied in France, along with urban workers, traders, and even some traditional leaders, started to organize. Political associations and proto-parties began to emerge across French West Africa, like the Rassemblement Démocratique Africain, RDA. The global climate was also shifting. The old colonial empires were looking increasingly anachronistic. The whispers were growing louder, and they were starting to sound a lot like freedom. France, not exactly thrilled about dismantling its empire but also realizing the writing was on the wall, began to implement some reforms. The most significant of these was the Loi Cadre, or Overseas Reform Act, of 1956. This act granted a significant degree of internal self-government to the individual territories within French West Africa. Then came the crucial year of 1958. French President Charles de Gaulle proposed a new French community. African territories were given a choice in a referendum. Vote yes to become autonomous republics within this new community, or vote no for immediate independence. Following the yes vote, Upper Volta became a self-governing republic within the French community on December 11, 1958. Maurice Yameogo, a prominent leader of the Voltaic Democratic Union, UDV-RDA, became the head of government. The final step came relatively quickly, and so on August 5, 1960, the Republic of Upper Volta officially became an independent nation. So, independence, woohoo! Problem solved, right? Well, not quite. One of the biggest hangovers was the economic dependency. France maintained significant economic influence through things like the CFA franc currency zone and trade agreements. Politically, the early years of independence across Africa were often turbulent, and Upper Volta was no exception. Maurice Yameogo, the first president, was overthrown in a coup in 1966. A truly symbolic and powerful moment of breaking with that colonial past came in 1984. A charismatic and revolutionary young military officer named Thomas Sankara came to power. Sankara was a Pan-Africanist visionary who sought genuine self-reliance for his country. One of his most famous acts was changing the country's name from Upper Volta to Burkina Faso. The journey from colonial conquest to the present day has been long and arduous, but the story of the land of upright men is still being written.